I'm not going to do as long an introduction for you, Jim, but I will introduce our speaker tonight. Jim Greaves has been a friend of mine for a very long time. In fact, he was my boss at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Jim started off in as a painting conservator there and eventually became head of the lab. And I was right out of graduate school doing research, and then our careers crisscrossed a lot. He came to the High Museum and did a conservation survey and visited me in Roanoke with his wife Alice Greaves, and we've just always stayed in touch. Jim has very eclectic Catholic tastes. He has collected Islamic art. He has collected pre-Columbian art, 19th century painting, but I think he's always had a profound love of all things Japanese, including his beautiful wife Alice, who unfortunately we lost in 2009. She was in on the beginning of talking about this exhibition, but she collected so many of these stones with Jim, so we think of Alice tonight as we hear Jim get up and speak to us. But it is with great pleasure that I introduce not only Jim Greaves, but Taka, the dog, and I'll let you introduce her. There you go. So Jim, thank you, and welcome. Is that good enough? Can you see?
I don't need
Okay,
much. I don't probably need any light. You could just. Yeah, I don't.
There are seats up here, so if you want to come in before he starts, please do.
Do these lights go off here?
They do.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
You want it completely dark.
Yeah, I might as well. I don't think I need it in my face.
But you don't have to read anything.
I can't read without glasses anyway.
Oh, they're filming you, so they have to have them on a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah, whatever you want.
All right.
You want to
And can we get that started?
just hit that go? Okay. Let me just say that Judy was a lot brighter than I was back when she worked for me, and still is. And I was delighted to have a chance to come up here and work with her on this show. This is going to be kind of a mixed lecture. There's not enough time to do the history or any single part of it with a lot of accuracy. It's going to be a lot of fast movement. Hopefully there'll be something to appeal to everybody. American viewing stones is just basically a coin term. These stones are collected in Europe. They're collected pretty much around the world now, Australia and different places. All of this stone history as we're doing it ultimately goes back to China, and most of the more direct involvement today around the world is because of the Japanese form, which is suiseki. And suiseki is translated different ways, but suiseki mainly is sui water and seki stone, and so people say water stone. But if you go back into the Chinese, the characters together more totally mean landscape. And the landscape stones are the traditional stones of Japan, even though there are not too many in our own exhibition here. I'd like to show this. It's disputed, but the Maka Spanskat, I'm not sure I pronounced it right, cobble was discovered many years ago, and as you can read up there, possibly it's potentially dated back to humanoids at 2.5 to 3 million years old. This little pebble, which is obviously has a face to it, was found in a cave in South Africa under layers of datable material, and the stone itself, the closest source for it is like 12 or 20 miles or something from that cave, so it had to have been carried back because it meant something to some humanoid, whether it was Australopithecus or what. This is argued, but it seems like there may be some validity to it. I like to point it out because it proves that my art is the oldest art. All through early development of man and right up through like the Plains Indians or whatever, you have what is known as a manuport, and that's just a piece that a man can carry. And this is an example that's actually in the show out there. I present it as a bison. In the case, it could be a walrus if I wanted to play an Arctic scene or something. But the idea is this is something that would be a shaman in a tribe might carry for good luck on the buffalo hunt or something in that nature. You see these Zuni fetishes and things which are like a more elaborate takeoff on that. Sexual stones or forms are obviously, for primitive cultures, major source of power and magic. And in India, about the only stones you see are the lignum stones that represent sexual forms. Whereas the Japanese and the Asians do collect these, but obviously you can't show them very easily in most public venues. This stone is very interesting in that this, if you look at the dates there, this is 200 BC to 200 AD from the Western Hemisphere. And it may be, again, one of the oldest stones that we can, kind of lay a date to that was collected because of the natural form. This is just a modern Chinese stone showing more or less the form of the famous Venus figures that you get Willendorf and through Europe, where they're probably all fertility fetishes. In China, going way back, because this is where it really all begins for us, there was a great interest in stone and jade particularly, though jade at that time meant any really precious stone. And we don't need to go into history of jade and such, but that's sort of the earliest sort of known artifacts of stone in China. China we have to look at a few pictures because when you see Chinese paintings or Chinese stones, they're very fantastic and tall and weird because we don't have mountains like that. But the Chinese actually do. And you'll see a few examples of this. This is the Guilin Valley, which is these gorgeous karst mountains. They're all limestone. And that's just the way they look. But you'll see this reflected in Chinese stones. Now going way back to probably before 100 AD or so, but certainly in the centuries after that, China went stone crazy. Emperors were known as petrophiles, petromaniacs. There was just this rage, and the rage was not for these little stones, but rage was for huge garden stones. And they transported them through their canal system. Sometimes the canal systems were built partially just to move the stones to the locations, because the literati, the powerful people, they weren't going to go out and collect stones. These were all just brought in as tribute, and it was a major tribute system. This is typical. I mean, these things are huge. This is probably an late 19th, early 20th century manufactured stone. This is an imitation of the natural stone, which the natural stone was pretty well disappearing a few hundred years ago. And so these things were taken primarily out of Lake Tai or Taihu stones, and it reached a point where families would drill them, throw them back in, and then 2 generations later they'd dig them out after they'd weathered. And this is still going on. I'll show you later. But anyway, this is marble, and I think it's beautiful, but it's basically an artificial stone. And that's one big difference from China and the Japanese, Korean, and American tradition. The Chinese work almost everything. The stone was part of it, and everything could be improved by man. This was the combination. Whereas that's Japanese, no way, and the Koreans are even more severe. Here's just some pictures showing, again, how their mountain effects are a bit different from ours. Unfortunately, I don't have any Chinese-style stones in the show simply because of lack of space. The early Chinese Stonelore, there were a couple subjects that were very important to them. One was the Isles of Penglade. There's 2 or 3 of them. They're the islands of the immortals that were off the coast, really where Japan is. And it was supposed to be the place where the Taoist immortals would go. And I just show this, it's one of their typical subjects. Here's a stone that's from Oregon that if I lost some pictures with a PowerPoint mess up today, but I had a picture that very closely resembled this from an old Chinese manuscript. The idea with Chinese, you see it's got a very narrow base, it's got a lot of texture and depressions. That's quite different from the Japanese approach. The other thing that happens in China is that when painting develops, in the Song Dynasty especially, there's a great emphasis, again through Taoism, on mountains. And mountains, I don't have a pointer, but actually that's a landscape with figures, and the figures are so small that you need magnifying glass to find them. Mankind was totally just an almost irrelevant aspect of the natural world. The stone on the right is a jade from Wyoming, and it has much of the same feel. Again, if you look at like the horizontal line at the bottom, it could be the road that's over here and hard to see, and paths going up the mountains. But in any case, Chinese painting is in many ways the core of the art of Suiseki. And when you go out and look in the gallery, the arrangement of stones on the far end, it has like a more distant mountain at the top, and as you work down, things get closer. That's the Chinese painting sense of perspective and hierarchy. The most distant thing is at top, and you work down to the details. We'll see some other examples of that. Another famous Chinese story involves a man named Mi Fu, who was a I guess, a scholar, government official, and he wasn't particularly useful. But he loved fancy clothes and he loved rocks, and he's known as Crazy Mi, or he's also quite well known as a poet and a painter. You still see, if you go on Google, you can Google his style. Freer Gallery has one in Washington. Very soft. He developed a style that's like pointillist almost. But anyway, there's a story about him bowing to a stone and addressing it as elder brother stone. And this is a very famous subject over and over in Chinese painting. And the idea was he actually was some remote outpost and he was ticked off. He had to report in. And so before he stopped in to see the guy that was over him, the supervisor, he stopped by to look at this famous stone and bow to it first. So it was kind of an insult to his new boss. Mi Fu was maybe best known right now as he wrote the most famous book on Chinese inkstones. And this is an example of an inkstone that was carved to look like a mountain. It's partially natural, partially carved. Here's a inkstone for rubbing ink in it, and it's made out of what we'd call a Chinese chrysanthemum stone. Those are not flowers, but they're crystals that just form that way. Here is again with the scholar's implements, a brush rest made to look like a mountain with a natural stone with peaks on it. They also then started making porcelain mountains and everything else to copy it. Later on, the literati started carving their own seals to add one more step. They did the painting, they wanted to do everything. So they started carving their own seals, but they weren't that good to be using jade. So what they did is they started using soapstone, which is easier to carve. Soapstone was yellow, so that got them away from the jade color into collecting color stones. And here's a typical yellow, what they call a yellow wax stone. You might notice the very elaborate carved base on a lot of these Chinese stones. It's a whole different approach from what you see in the gallery and the Japanese. Often with a Chinese stone, you see the base first. Again, we get back to the mountains. This also inspired cutting slabs of marble and laying it in screens, furniture. You've seen these. This started it probably more in the Ming period, and especially got heavy in the 19th century. This is a modern one. which I love. They're still doing it. You can buy them on eBay. This one I bought from a pretty knowledgeable importer several years ago, and I just love it. To me, it's just my New England woods in the snow, looking down through the bushes. But that was, all of maybe an $80 stone. And if you want to buy stones, buy Chinese, because you can't even touch an American stone for the price of a Chinese stone. The Chinese are the only stone collectors of all of us who, one of their criteria is sound. Chinese stones, the best ones have a chime sound, and this is a chime made out of a stone. But even a big mountain, if you hit it, should ring like it's iron. Here's just some typical convoluted shapes of the Chinese stones. You can see they're very active, almost always inverted in terms of balance, off balance. They're dynamic, and most of them are half carved. This one is, you can read it probably faster than I can say it, but this is a stone that a fellow literally lost his head for because he wouldn't give it to the emperor. This is again a modern flower stone. You can get these, you can find them for $40, $20, $80, and some of them are quite beautiful. It's just that out of 100, maybe one really has good balance, and they just crank them out of the material. Here's a giant one that was in Japan, and the Chinese just brought it back. You can see the size of it. You can get a little bit more varied. This is wonderful, like silkworm or caterpillar or something. Very elaborate. It's in a lot of Chinese books. The Chinese go from their traditional scholars' rocks basically like this and collect anything there is. And a lot of it's terrific. The Japanese almost have never moved beyond landscape stones, as we'll see. In China today, there are 2 or 3 stone market towns. One town has 1,000 wholesalers, and the big Singapore has, I think it's Singapore has about 800 dealers in their market, and these sell to the other dealers, and it trickles out. It's a huge industry. People have their finders all over the country, finding the stuff, bringing it into these markets. Here, this is just for amusement. These are all natural stones from the Gobi Desert. You get beautiful agates and incredible things from there. Alice and I years ago made the decision we were going to concentrate on trying to do the best we could by American stones, and we passed most of this stuff by, assuming sooner or later someone else will contribute a collection of them to complement our American stones. And then what they call the Moor stones. These, you'll have people stand on their heads swearing these are real, and I've seen some I think are, and I've been told by people where they've been collected they're real. They are just so beautiful, I don't care. I mean, they're just fabulous. And again, they're not necessarily too expensive, though this whole site was bought up by, I think, a very wealthy Taiwanese man, and I think he just bought everything underground and above and owns it all now. Japan, whole different feeling. In Japan, the first, I lost one of the slides I needed here in the PowerPoint today, but in Japan, Chinese stones were introduced by way of the Koreans around 6th, 7th century. There's a gift to the Empress Suiko around then, a known gift. But they were stones of the Chinese manner, because the Koreans collected the Chinese stones too, because of the scholarly connections. This is a picture of the Portuguese who, when they got into the trade with China, they brought in more stones. And you can see over on the right, about a third of the way up, there's a stone in a basin or on a pillow. You can't even tell in this. Maybe the next one's closer. It's in a basin, okay, in a bronze basin. And we still display them like that. And this is the first, like an early example of what we call a penjing, or a small mountain in a basin. They also brought them in on you see them presented on pillows and cushions and stuff. It's not done too often. This is a well-known Japanese stone. The Japanese in the beginning, their interest was Chinese stones from the Chinese literati, because that established your worth as a Japanese literati. And so this is a very famous stone that's supposed to be the poet Li Po from China. It's been passed down collection by collection. It's almost a national treasure in Japan. The Japanese, obviously you all think of Japanese gardens. And the Japanese gardens have many of the same forms of stone as you'll see in the small suiseki and viewing stones. The major difference is size, and with the garden, there's a slightly different whole system of just culture of setting the stones and rules and things that don't apply necessarily to the small stones. You're familiar with the dry gardens and Zen gardens, as they're called. Even almost every book that's been written about these stones talks about Zen and the Zen influence in meditation and all of this. I have yet to find any validation for this viewpoint. I mean, it has